Okay, so welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our ORCID US Community October call on the topic Research Information Management Systems and ORCID. Just so that you know who I am and who our ORCID US community staff are, I'm Sheila Rabin. I'm the program leader for persistent identifier communities at LYRASIS, which is the administrative home of the ORCID US Community Consortium. And also on the call, we have Paolo Guhilde, who is our ORCID US community specialist. And Paolo will be monitoring the chat. Feel free to also message Paolo directly if you need anything during the session. And we have three great featured guest speakers with us today, and they'll introduce themselves in more detail in just a minute. But we have Rebecca Bryant from OCLC, Jan Fransen from University of Minnesota, formerly. Jan's retired. Congrats, Jan, and thanks for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us today. And then we also have Bruce Herbert from Texas A&M University. And so really this call is going to feature our guest speakers. So we'll be hearing a lot from them today, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. So we will be hearing information about OCLC did a research report on research information management systems in the US. So we're going to hear about that and some of the best practices and findings that emerged from that, including specifically ORCID in research information management systems. And then we'll hear a great case study from Texas A&M as well. And I know we have many other people on the call that might also have your own case studies, so we would love to hear you during the discussion portion too. And hopefully this conversation can continue even after this call. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our guest speakers. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay, this is Rebecca. I believe I am the driver of slides. So let me share that, start the slideshow. Okay, is that working? Everybody see my slides? Okay, I see some thumbs up. Great. Okay, so we're going to just do a quick introduction of ourselves. I'm Rebecca Bryant. I work as a senior program officer with OCLC Research, and specifically with the OCLC Research Library Partnership of about 130 libraries worldwide. I spent most of my career at the University of Illinois, much of it in the graduate school and academic affairs, and a little bit of it in the library, leading the pure implementation of Illinois' RIMS system there. And in the interim, I spent a couple of years as community director for ORCID back when I was like the 4th or 5th employee. So always a delight to do anything to support the ORCID community. So that's about me. Jan, maybe you want to do your spiel?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's exciting to be back. I see a lot of familiar names, and I'll see your faces again, I hope, very soon. So yes, I'm Jan Fransen from the University of Minnesota. I am retired, but I will still say present tense for everything I'm talking about. I do pop in still for occasional projects with the university, and am involved in the community still in between, vacations and things like that. Happy to be here today and looking forward to hearing about your own case studies as Rebecca and I and Bruce present ours.
Awesome. Jan has the position that I aspire to, a person of leisure and wit. My name is Bruce Herbert, and I am the former director of the Office of Scholarly Communications in the University Library here at Texas A&M, and currently a professor of agriculture, which is pretty cool. And I also chair the VIVO Leadership Governance Group. VIVO is an open source community that is coordinated and managed with LYRASIS, the nonprofit group. And I chair the group that kind of provides the strategic vision for the VIVO open source community. And that's my ORCID there. So click on it, you'll see what I've done, because I've done some really weird things in life.
Thanks, Bruce. All right. So what I'm going to start with is some of the work we've done at OCLC around research information management. So beginning in 2017, after I joined OCLC, I was hired to sort of lead this research agenda. And so we've had a few reports looking at the research information management or CRIS system environment. The one that's circled here is important because it was a survey that Jan also worked on with us of research information management practices in sort of globally. So we conducted a survey and got great samples back from places like the Netherlands and the UK and Australia, where things are, where the environment's mature and where people know what we're talking about. And we ended up getting a really lousy sample from the United States, in part because I think there's a lot of confusion about what we call these things and what they are. And so we decided we needed to tackle this differently. And so what we did was we pursued a project called Research Information Management in the United States, and we took a case study approach where we looked at the RIM practices of 5 research universities listed here that represented a diversity of products, use cases, scale, whether it's like at the college level or at the institution level, or sometimes even at the state level in the case of Florida and Miami, and a diversity of stakeholders. And in all, we conducted 39 semi-structured interviews to collect information about these 5 institutions. And the result was this 2-part report, which is available open access, like everything at OCLC Research, on our website. So the first part is findings and recommendations, and that's what Jan and I are going to be talking about today. But if you really want to know how these institutions have implemented their almost always multiple RIM systems, you can read the case studies for a lot of details about just, all of the practices in depth. And note the Texas A&M is actually one of the institutions in this case study. So this effort was led by Jan and myself as co-PIs on this project. Jan actually spent her sabbatical with us, which was great. So, something that a lot of people don't know that we have been able to leverage here at OCLC Research. So something to think about. And then we were joined by 3 other practitioners in the RIM space. I want to particularly call out Pablo de Castro, who is in Scotland at Strathclyde University in Glasgow, but is very active with EuroCRIS as a long-standing board member there. And I think was really helpful for us to make sure that the findings, as we presented findings that were specific to the US, we wanted to present them in a way that could also still be harmonized with the larger CRIS community as represented sort of through EuroCRIS. So just sort of a note that we try to be mindful of sort of the global conversation around that. So forward slide, hello. Okay. What is this thing called research information management? So that was one of the things we wanted to tackle, is understanding what this is, because and to offer sort of a definition that we could hopefully sort of get all behind. And we define this as RIM systems support the transparent aggregation, curation, and utilization of data about research activities. Sometimes I paraphrase this in a different way, that this is about institutional curation of its own scholarly record. So, but we also want to emphasize that it's not just the collection and curation of this information, it also needs to be transparent. It needs to be in a way that people can look at the data behind it. And so that was important for us. Now, what I'll also say is that we're calling this research information management and RIM systems, or RIMS, but I joke, if you've seen me present before, you've seen this can. I joke that it's just an alphabet soup of 3- and 4-letter acronyms, because we're calling these a lot of different things. And it's because our environment's really siloed. So when I was in Illinois, I think we were calling these researcher profile system. There's a whole community that calls this expert finder systems. Very often people are instead calling them research networking systems, all kind of the same thing. In Europe, they call them CRIS systems, and that's of long standing. But when I find it's being used in the US, it's really not with the same understanding of what a European would mean it in a CRIS system. So that can be kind of problematic. And also within this umbrella, I tend to also include faculty information systems, or, you know, the things used for faculty activity reporting, because they aggregate a lot of the same content. So, you know, it's useful to sort of, you know, think about these as related and perhaps needing to be interoperable systems. Another way that can be helpful to think about what the space is to look at the product space. So, so we have a couple products that are sort of the leaders in this space, particularly in the US, which are the Elsevier Pure system, which Jan and I both have a lot of familiarity with, and also the Simplectix Element systems. So both of these are systems that are sort of traditional CRIS systems. They come out of the European landscape. They were driven by European uses. And they also sort of are driven and are owned sort of by larger sort of the publishing sort of sphere, if you will. Also in this space, we have the VIVO, which Bruce can say more about, and as well as Profiles RNS, also often called as Harvard Profiles. These are open source systems that have been around for a decade or more. They both were seeded by the National Institutes of Health. Their sort of driving use case is really to support expertise discovery through public portals. And Profiles RNS in particularly is used by a lot of biomedical sort of institutions, medical centers, health centers. We also have faculty information systems, or FIS systems, which are, you know, sort of coming out of HR or academic affairs. A lot of your institutions probably use Watermark, Faculty Success, maybe also known as Activity Insights or Digital Measures. It's had a lot of rebranding. Simplectix Element supports this use case. Interfolio also supports this, and note that Interfolio earlier this year was acquired by Elsevier, so we're seeing some consolidation in the market. Ex Libris is a recent entry into this space, so a few of you may be from institutions that are implementing or development partners for Esploro. It's really sort of a hybrid product with an institutional repository at the core, driven out of the library sector, and now again consolidated because of its recent acquisition by Clarivate. And then Caius is also, you know, sort of within the research administration sector, has recently also acquired a product that works in the space, coming from the UK, called Haplo. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jan to speak about some of the findings from the report.
Thanks, Rebecca. So you just heard about, and actually back to the RIM use cases slide. Thanks, Rebecca. So you just heard about how we went about this and all of the different products in this space. And of course, that also means we have all these different use cases. We were looking at all the different things that people were doing with these systems that we considered all doing the same thing, and we classified them as RIM systems, and we grouped them together and came up with these 6 different use cases. I'm not going to talk through all 6 here, but instead I want you to think about how each of these use cases might or might not benefit from the use of a persistent identifier like ORCID. You can imagine that each of these might require a different level of data, of detail in that metadata. A public portal, for example, it doesn't necessarily need to have persistent identifiers to look good, but you can imagine that the people who are tasked with putting together that data that's going to be displayed in the portal will benefit from persistent identifiers behind the scenes. And then also when you're feeding that data out into other systems, you'll want to have, as much as you can, people be able to match up other data from those systems easily. Again, persistent identifiers then become crucial. Next slide. Next slide, Rebecca. Thanks. So these are our key findings. Again, I'm not going to go through each one of them, but that centrality of the agreed upon identifiers becomes even more obvious when you consider these key findings. The landscape is decentralized. There's a lot of duplication. There's a lot of confusion about what RIM systems are and what they do. We don't have any national mandates in the US, or at least not yet, that push institutions to consolidate these efforts and centralize when the use cases might not be the same, but they need to make use of that same data. Let's go to the next slide. We thought it was very important to come up with some recommendations for institutional decision makers. Those of us who work in the space see some of these things as very obvious, or things that we would classify as lessons learned. We went into this thinking, oh, it'll be very easy to get this up and running. Maybe we better set the expectations that these are not turnkey systems. They require a lot of work to get up and running and to maintain over time. They are better served with cross-functional teams. Having data governance, enterprise level data governance involved in this effort can really help to institutionalize the work and make it as reusable as it possibly can be. And then, of course, I've got that arrow pointing there. Support the adoption of persistent identifiers. Again, these things, we can see easily, those of us who work with the data, why it makes sense to have those persistent identifiers associated with individual items, whether it's publications or people or whatever. That's not intuitively obvious to everybody who makes use of those systems and the data within them. So it's important to bring that to the fore. Next slide. Okay, so how does ORCID fit into the RIM picture? So as we were trying to describe what each institution in our case studies was doing, Bruce, sometime I'm going to find the napkin that I sketched out what Texas A&M's ecosystem looks like and show it to you. It was maybe
if you can explain the chaos at A&M, that would be amazing.
There was a reason why I backed away from that and said, how can we come up with some kind of visual that will help us to describe all of these, Texas A&M and each of the others that we were looking at, in a way that makes sense? Because each one of these has multiple use cases, usually multiple use cases, at least one. But it has some kind of ecosystem that comes together, and I keep doing my little hourglass hands here. Again, I'm not going to talk through each layer. I urge you to read the report to learn more about that. It really does help to understand different institutions, systems, and how they work and come together. But I will point you first to that top layer, the data sources. RIM systems don't happen without data sources, which might be internal and might be external. The one that we think of the most often that's central to almost any RIM system is publication databases. And that's one of the places where ORCID fits in. So we might be, there are systems where people are tasked with typing in all the information from PDF CVs or something like that. But by and large, these systems are importing from publication databases like Scopus or PubMed or Web of Science. ORCID can be and is, for many of them, another source for pulling data into the internal RIM system. And then down there, after the data are collected and brought together into a data source, it goes out to other places to serve different use cases. And one of those places can be ORCID. You can set up your RIM system, in many cases, to transfer information that you've now collected and curated and made beautiful back to ORCID so that it can then be reused by others in different ways. Okay, next slide. I'm going to talk about the University of Minnesota as an example. University of Minnesota was, of course, not one of the institutions that we studied, but I wanted to talk about what we have done there for a couple of reasons. The first one is it's a pretty classic example of there are two different systems that we would classify as RIM systems at the University of Minnesota campus. Experts at Minnesota, which I was the administrator for, is based on Elsevier's Pure. It is the public portal. That's how most people at the university think of it. Expertise discovery, research showcase, shows off what an individual is doing, what a center is doing, etc. We have profiles for 8,500 researchers. And behind the scenes, we have a lot more profiles that are not shown publicly for graduate students, for staff members who are not technically researchers, but can be involved in research, and so on. Excuse me. It's managed out of the libraries. So, and then we also have another system, which we branded as Works, that is an instance of the Watermark Faculty Success product, formerly Digital Measures Activity Insights. That supports faculty activity reporting, or FIS, as Rebecca spelled it out earlier. It's managed by the Office of the Vice Provost for Faculty and Academic Affairs. Now, both of them have, each of them has an ORCID integration. For Pure, the integration is read-write. So people can import items from their ORCID record, or when items are added to Pure that aren't already in ORCID, they get sent automatically to the person's ORCID record. Faculty Success is a read-only implementation, so people can import from ORCID into Faculty Success. Now, because experts exports to ORCID and Works can import from ORCID, that's how we suggest people connect the two. We don't have any formal process. We've not written anything taking advantage of APIs or anything like that to feed data from one to the other to synchronize them. That'd be awesome. We have not had the bandwidth to do that. So what we do is we tell people, make sure your expert's profile looks good, make sure you've linked your ORCID ID, and then you will be able to import all of that data, all those research outputs into Works, into your Works account for faculty activity reporting. Okay, next slide. Okay, I have here, one of my colleagues put together this graphic. Probably looks a little bit blurry, but you can go to the website and see it as well. Just to help people understand this data flow, that the data, you can link up ORCID in different places and make use of it. And we've shown there our internal systems, Experts at Minnesota and Works I've just talked about. Manifold is something that is based on experts, but it's medical school specific. And then showing some of the places where the data can go out to. Science EV, we highlighted there. It's something that researchers in general, not all of them, but many of our researchers are very aware of. And it helps them to understand how it benefits them. It saves them data entry time to link these things together using that persistent identifier. Next slide. Okay, but Experts and Works are not the only ORCID integrations we have at the University of Minnesota. We actually have 5. I thought we maxed out. I couldn't believe it. So this is the third one. The third one is the integration with the university's identity management system. So anybody, whether they're covered by Experts in Minnesota or Works or not, anybody, researchers, staff, students, can link their University of Minnesota record to their ORCID record. Right now, we're not actually doing anything with those ORCID IDs. We are collecting them as part of our identity management. And we're not even actually advertising it. We did an initial push and that's it, but it's continued to grow almost exponentially. It's certainly a great progression. We've had about 3,000 people link their ORCID IDs to their identities within the university system. Next slide. The other two integrations are both related to journals. Our business school publishes MIS quarterly using ScholarOne from Clarivate. They implemented that about a year ago, and nearly 2,000 authors have added their ORCID IDs when they've submitted a paper. So that's going quite well. And then the final one, thanks, is the University of Minnesota Libraries Publishing Service. The libraries publishes about 30 journals using OJS, which is an open source publishing system. So for me, in my work, I was focused on collecting ORCID IDs for University of Minnesota researchers so we could collect the RIM data. But as these two integrations show, when our institutions are the publishers, it's important that we push that published information out to ORCID on behalf of the authors. It helps feed the whole ecosystem. And now I'm going to hand it back to Rebecca to talk about another one of our use case studies.
Yeah, so So as part of our report, we also, sort of did an in-depth assessment of and documented 3 RIMS systems at Penn State. And I know there's at least one person from Penn State here attending this webinar, so I know you're the expert. So if you feel free to add details or in chat, I really appreciate that. We found 3 RIMS systems at Penn State. They're similarly, a lot of it looks actually sort of like what we see at Minnesota, is that there's a research portal using Elsevier Pure. It has public profiles for about 5,500 researchers. It's managed by the research office and the medical college. There's also a faculty information system supporting faculty activity reporting workflows. That's managed by the library, which is a little bit interesting and unusual, but I think very exciting also to see how successful they've been with this. They also use the Watermark product and have locally branded it Activity Insight. And then thirdly, there is another system called the Researcher Metadata Database, which has been created to support the institutional open access policy with an improved workflow for researchers, so they don't have to enter metadata, so that, related to depositing the work in the institutional repository. It aggregates metadata from both Pure and Activity Insights, and that can be used for supporting reporting and metadata reuse. It's also managed by the library. And what we know is that there are ORCID integrations with all of these, and in all of these systems, ORCID information can be imported into these systems. What I also know is that the research metadata database can also be used to write back to somebody's ORCID record, so that then that data can then be, reused for Science TV or, to maybe talk back to one of the other systems in the way that Jan described it at Minnesota. There's also at Penn State a similar type of integration with the identity management system. So some screenshots here, you can link, and what I did know from poking around a little bit with their campus directory is that the ORCID ID is displayed. I don't know what the campus is doing. It may not be doing any more than Minnesota is, but it is at least displaying these and providing a link out to the ORCID profile from the directory information. So there's that, and those are the slides I had. I'm going to turn it over to Bruce now, who will talk about Texas A&M.
Outstanding. Thanks very much, Rebecca. So again, my name is Bruce Herbert, and part of the hats I wear is serving as chair of the VIVO Leadership Governance Group. VIVO is an open source RIMS system that's supported by the VIVO community. It's an open source RIMS system built by, for, and with the communities involved. It's quite customizable because it's open source. You have control over the software. You also have quite good control over the ontology, which is really good for us as we customize VIVO for our own institutional needs and context. One of the primary reasons that Texas A&M moved to VIVO early on instead of some of the commercial systems, which certainly would have been in some ways easier to implement, was that our provost demanded that we have control over our data. Texas A&M was one of the early institutions that were being attacked by foreign organizations and people looking for research and research data. And the university was quite concerned about that. So we were really interested in controlling our own data about our own research. And so having that data on campus was a big deal for Texas A&M. And of course, VIVO is a little bit different than most of the other systems in that it's a semantic technology. And so this particularly is interesting and being explored in its support of open science practices, particularly the development of the knowledge graph as we release our research data metadata to the world. VIVO is part of a member-supported open source programs that are run or managed or supported by lyricists. These include DSpace or the US group of ORCID, DataSite, Fedora, Archive Space, among others. And all these open source tools, many of you will probably know and might use. Really good. Next slide. So ORCIDs are integrated into our scholars at Texas A&M, our VIVO RIMS system. They're also used across campus in many ways. We were the first university, I believe, that got research money from the ORCID organization to try to develop ORCIDs for graduate students. So we're exploring around those methods. And so ORCID is built into business processes. It is included in the directory at Texas A&M. So ORCIDs are then linked to our university information numbers, UINs, which are somewhere in some super secret database tied to our social security numbers, but I don't ever see that. So ORCIDs are out there. We got relatively good uptake of ORCIDs on campus, but it's growing. And our scholars at Texas A&M system helps that process. And so just like every other RIM system in the world, right, we're bringing in heterogeneous data from lots of different sources and trying to link all that together. And the PIDs in particular are really, really important for that process. So you have ORCIDs and our local UINs as our people PIDs. We are, of course, using DOIs and numbers for our institution. We are actually working on a project right now, a research project to develop PIDs for scientific instruments on campus that are part of shared facilities, because these major research facilities at Texas A&M have often complained that it's difficult for researchers on campus and around the world to search across A&M to find out what instruments are in each of these systems. So we're working with a German university, TIB. It's actually the library research institution in Germany to develop a system of PIDs for instruments. So we're collecting information from lots of places. As faculty sign up from ORCID, we often guide them. Well, we always guide them. Whether they do it or not is their choice. To give A&M permission to read write into their ORCIDs. If they do, and most do, we're then harvesting data from DSpace and Altmetric, bpress for for Texas A&M Law School, and ORCID profiles all get processed into symplectic elements, which is our primary data harvesting system that we use. Symplectic elements is, of course, a tool from digital science. That data then is pushed into our profile editor. Our RIM system has really made a big deal out of allowing or supporting faculty control of their own profile, because a big part of our use cases is advancing faculty reputation through discoverable digital identity. And so we want them to be able to represent their profile through a narrative about the scholarly and societal impact of their work. And so what you see is a lot of faculty go in and will quite customize their profile and add additional data. We get constant requests for new kinds of data to be harvested and added to the profile. Through this system, probably because we put so much control in the hands of faculty so they can control it, we are up to 92% faculty participation in our RIM system, so that we're tracking who logs in and who doesn't. And in the words of my VPR, when I announced that we had actually reached 80%, he looked at me and he goes, "I can't believe anybody can do that. I couldn't get 50% of my faculty to agree the sky is blue on a clear sunny day. So, and anybody who works with faculty certainly knows that kind of attitude. We're collecting, of course, local information from lots of different sources, particularly our HR systems. We have a ERA system, an electronic research administration system that we're harvesting out of, and doing that kind of stuff. I'll bring that in, putting it into a SQL database where a lot of our data management and quality controls go. And then that, of course, is moved into the semantic side database, so that our data in ORCID is represented as RDF, released to the world, and we're adding in metrics and so on like that. We have a good, strong API that allows data reuse across campus. Our data is being pushed into our faculty reporting system, which is new since Jan and Rebecca introduced us, and relatively successful. The metadata is a little messy. Of course, you have to align the ontologies and the different tools. And what we're finding with our own instance of Interfolio is there's just not enough flexibility in Interfolio to routinely capture the range and diversity of creative and scholarly work that's occurring on campus. So everybody's being slotted into being a chemist, which really, really makes the artists very, very happy. So so we do a lot of data use and so on like that. One of the things that we are not doing, we're not pushing back into ORCID to fill their profile, mostly because in the beginning we had trouble with duplication of content of the metadata in the ORCID profile, and then faculty were not real happy about that. I imagine that as we, like University of Minnesota is doing, as we move to make more use of ORCID to populate the SciENCV bios for NSF and NIH, that we'll start working on the pushing from scholars back to ORCID, so that the data in ORCID profiles are up to date and available for that SciENCV, making hopefully that kind of business process as seamless as possible. Interestingly enough, the combination of building faculty profiles this way, integrating the ORCID and so on, helping their digital identity, plus the data reuse, particularly for our annual evaluation process through Interfolio, has actually made our scholars at Texas A&M the #1 most valued library service at Texas A&M, as shown by recent surveys. It didn't, for those of you that know the story, it didn't stop the reorganization of the university library, but we'll see. Great. Next slide. Good. I just wanted to show you one thing. So this is what our scholars looks like. I kind of cut out some of the parts of the profile in here, but it's quite customizable. I can really say a lot of different things, make it look different, which is really pretty cool. And we've included the ORCID right there on the front of the profile. Of course, if you click the link, it takes people right back to their profile. And we got one of the best outcomes of this, of doing adding ORCIDs to scholars' profile and allowing faculty to essentially work with their ORCIDs through scholars, is that we're really controlling or limiting the duplication of ORCIDs for an individual faculty member. Before we had a lot of this together, the faculty, they would forget their logins, they kind of forget their ORCID, they wouldn't track that. And then as they were required to supply an ORCID for perhaps a journal or a grant proposal, they would just go and get another one. And so we ended up having a fairly significant number of faculty with multiple ORCIDs something that we know that really makes our friends and colleagues in the ORCID community quite happy. That's just really good. So this way they just remember that. Yeah, it's outstanding. I think that's the last slide I have. Is that right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
great.
I have just one thing I wanted to step in and
Yes.
say here, and Bruce, Jan, and I are all serving on the steering committee for the International Forum on Expert Finder Systems, or RIMS systems. And so we will be hosting an in-person event in Miami, Florida, April 5th and 6th. There's a link here. One of us will put it also in the chat. The call for papers is also open through October 24th. I'm the program chair, so let me know if you have questions. We would love for people on this call to submit proposals. And also, we're having a webinar series. Our next webinar is on December 1st. You can poke around on the website and find information about all of this. So our goal is really to develop a community of practice around research information management in North America and beyond. So please join us. And I think with that, we're all done and eager to talk with everybody with questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca, Jan, and Bruce. I'm just changing the settings so that people can now unmute and also turn on your video if you'd like. That was a lot of great information. I was taking notes in our agenda document. Does anybody have questions for the presenters or comments or things that you'd like to add?
I have a really, really funny failure story when we first started working with ORCIDs and grad students, which is just great. Somebody should ask me about that. Because we're actually really proud. Our first initial project with ORCID failed so spectacularly that in fact ORCID went and changed their workflow. So it was good. Yes, we tried to implement ORCIDs for grad students by minting the ORCIDs first without grad student input. And so we were, since we have 12, 15,000 grad students, we were minting a lot of ORCIDs and hardly anything were getting picked up. The students would get emails saying, hey, we've minted your ORCID, and they were pretty sure they were spam, so they would just delete them. So it was pretty funny. Not the correct way to do it. Much better to pull, not push.
Yes, that's right. So for everyone on the call, as Bruce mentioned, A&M was one of the first universities to kind of test out ORCID. And during that time, it was, let's create IDs for everybody and then have them adopt it. Because that didn't work, now you can't create ORCID ID research. They have to actively create their own, know what's going on. So thanks for piloting that and helping us figure out what will work best for everyone.
Yeah.
Bruce, we do have a question in the chat specifically.
Outstanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a question for you asking if you could say more about the work that you're doing. You mentioned you're coming up with some identifiers for equipment. So can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's good. So the use case came up in relation to a presentation I gave during kind of a celebration of our research facilities, shared research centers, and almost every campus has these things. These are really expensive equipment like nuclear magnetic resonance spectrometers or mass spectrometers or genetic testing or something like that, that is shared across the whole campus. So anybody can come in for usually a small fee and use that equipment. They were generating a kind of a Word document that would list all the equipment in the probably 50 different centers we have across campus. And somehow people were supposed to find which center had the right equipment they might need. And so right during my talk, I just kind of changed my talk and I said, perhaps this would work. And we started talking about assigning PIDs, kind of a custom PID to a specific instrument, and then adding in the research centers as organizations within our scholars at Texas A&M RIMS system. And that would allow a faculty member to go in and type in the keywords for the instrument that they need, and then use that RIMS system, our scholars, as a discovery system for the instrument. And then it would provide contact information and the people that we need to talk to and stuff. Very, very popular. Of course, you know, you got to work out an ontology for those kinds of PIDs, right? You got to start classifying all the instruments into different classes, and then figure out how the PIDs are going to be structured in such a way. We haven't talked about ORCID about that because we are about a month into the project. But I would expect it to be done in a year or so. There was some, as I mentioned, there was kind of a fairly good preliminary work that we're building upon done in Germany. And I can look for the paper, or you could email me. I'll put my email up. I could find the German paper for the people that are interested in that. But
that would be great.
It seems to be really wildly popular on campus here to do it. And once we have the organization of the PIDs worked out, you know, essentially how we're going to define the numbers, I don't think the project would take more than a month to do.
That's great. And related to that, once you do have your identifiers for the equipment figured out, for people who may not know, ORCID does have a research resources section that I linked in the chat. And so that is something where when researchers come to use your special equipment or facilities, they can connect their ORCID ID with your organization or with that facility. And then you can actually write to their ORCID records saying that they used this specific piece of equipment or lab or whatever it may be, and then you can use your identifier in that entry. So so that's another way to kind of connect these dots.
Just 10 seconds, Sheila. One of the biggest outcomes that you just reminded me is the campus is particularly interested in linking the instrument PIDs to publication DOIs and grant numbers, right? And so then we can automatically generate the reports of the impact of the research centers and so on. That's all they talked about. Once I mentioned, you could probably do that some way, then that was I had them. Fish were...
That's perfect.
Okay, go ahead.
It's a great vision to connect all these
dots. It is.
No, it's okay. I'm seeing another question in the chat, and the question is, well, this is specifically asking about Interfolio, but I think this could also be more, you know, broadly for anyone on the call. You know, when you're getting ready to implement these types of research information management systems, and let's say you're in the library or wherever you may be, how do you prepare for it? How do you kind of assess the current resources that you have and identify what additional resources are needed? So, and I had these questions come up too. So like when you are embarking on these efforts and putting all these systems together, how do you do it? Where do you start? What stakeholders are involved? How are those decisions made? Any insight that any of our panelists or anyone else on the call might have about this, I think would be great for us to chat about for a minute.
Jan?
I was going to say, Jan, if you want to start with this, because you put this great comment in the chat.
Yeah, I shared a comment in the chat about the webinar that the EFS forum webinar that we had a couple of weeks ago. I shared the recording there. It focused on FAR systems, FIS systems, and one of the presenters actually was focused specifically on Interfolio and on their efforts. They've had Pure for a long time. They want to integrate the two and the kind of the lessons learned and things like that. So that would be a useful thing to look at. And actually, for anybody thinking about that system or any other system or combination of systems and how they might go together, I think that was a fantastic panel. University of California also presented, as well as Virginia Tech, and they've all taken interesting approaches to sort of holistically looking at these systems and how they come together. As you saw in Rebecca's and my slide about findings and recommendations, these systems on any one of our campuses, it's very likely you have more than one system that we would classify as RIM, and it's unfortunately also rather likely that the two systems don't talk to each other. I think that I think that Texas A&M is a little bit of an exception there. I know that you all came at Interfolio with the idea that it is going to be fed by this existing system we already have. And I think that's a great way to start. And then I'm pretty sure, I think you've already mentioned Bruce, and I know Kim did in her presentation, there's going to be a whole different level of metadata. The granularity and the way things are defined and the things that are allowed for entry are going to be really different from one to another. I know that's something we have found at Minnesota. I have done sort of pilot projects trying to take data from digital measures to import into Pure. And there again, it's all about the data matching. It's really tricky to get them to match up. Bruce, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So at A&M, we had Scholars was fairly well established before Interfolio was implemented, and interestingly, the demand that Scholars push data into Interfolio actually came from the faculty to the administration, and so I'm not sure the administration were going to even do that or think about it. We have had the exact same problem as Jan just mentioned, is matching up the data in the two systems. Not everything fits in the same categories. You gotta really customize it. And we have found the challenge here at A&M is this. It's actually kind of funny, and it's a little sad. We're kind of a top-down military style university. And so when Interfolio was implemented, the chancellor said, implement Interfolio. It's now the rule. And that was it. And of course, when data is not transferred correctly or there's something not going quite right, the faculty didn't know who to turn to. So they actually turned to us. And we had a lot of conversations saying, we don't control Interfolio. We're just pushing the data. That's all we can help you with. We can make the data in Scholars as accurate as possible. So we continue to fight that battle, to build in essence, just them concluding us and in the faculty training and the response and so on. And Rebecca has a great term for this, is that I have adopted as my own motto, but it's this idea of social interoperability is just as important as information system interoperability. So the ability of these different groups to work with each other effectively. So we'll see. We are doing this year, if you can imagine, we are adding 8,000 more people to the Interfolio Scholars ecosystem here on campus. And that's going to be fun. Yeah, Rebecca has put the link up for social interoperability. I really like this report. It is good, though. It's a good word. And that report had a lot of strategies that I thought were quite good.
Great. Thanks, y'all. And I know we have several other people, or I think some people have left the call, but I know have several other people who have implemented RIM systems at their institution. Does anybody else have kind kind of advice or things you would say are really important to do when you're looking at implementing or switching from one system to another, and also getting your researcher participation, because that's a big part of it too when it comes to ORCID, especially, is making sure that your researchers have an ORCID ID and know that they can connect it with your systems. Any other insight on that?
I was looking to Jan on that. One thing I would recommend is go back to the recommendations in our report,
Yeah.
and try. We wrote those in such a way that hopefully could be guidance for decision makers on campus, because they
Yeah.
may not realize that they may be hearing from a vendor that, oh, this is a turnkey system. I promise you, it's not a turnkey system. And so those recommendations, including using a broad array of PIDs, and I'd say especially ORCID, is sort of part of that. As far as getting faculty buy-in, I think that Texas A&M has really a great example of that. Bruce is going to say a little bit more about that. We also write about that in the report. So if you also want another place to go to, sort of where it's documented, look at the case studies, because they took their time, and it took a lot of time, and they did a really good job of finding out what faculty needed. So Bruce, you can talk about it better than I can.
Yeah, no problems. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, you know, one of the best strategies that we did at Texas A&M could be copied by almost any librarian here, is we implemented scholars through quite an elaborate iterative process, lots of focus groups, lots of listening to faculty response. But we coupled scholars and ORCID, the ORCID systems and scholars together with other services. So let me give you perhaps just one. I started a program, a service where I could meet individually with any faculty member going up for tenure and promotion. And we would help them build their digital identity, construct, if they needed or they wanted, their scholarly narrative, and look at metrics for scholarly impact and societal engagement. And this program, I didn't meet, you know, I probably met with about 30 or 40% of the faculty going up on campus every year. And over 5-6 years, by the time I got to 5-6 years, I had met with almost half the faculty on campus at a time when they are extremely stressed and very focused on what you're saying, right? And I think it was that coupling of services like that with the systems that we built that made trying to make their life better and easier, which got to such great support of our systems.
That's great, Bruce. And I've heard that from several other people in our community as well, just kind of including ORCID in, you know, in these other services, and just bringing it up as much as possible so that people can continue to have that in the front of their mind and be aware of it. I do realize we are at the end of this session. I know probably many people have other meetings they need to get to, so thank you so much to all of our panelists, Rebecca, Jan, and Bruce. Thank you everyone for coming and spending time with us today. If you have any additional questions or want to continue these types of conversations, send us an email at orcidus@lyrasis.org, and we can, Paolo and I can help you. We can talk to you. We can put you in touch with other people in the community that might be doing similar things that you're doing. So reach out to us. We're here for you. Would love to hear from you. And with that, just stay tuned for the recording and notes, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Sheila.